One thing that we got clarification on for the UFC 252 broadcast, at least in part, was the next defense for the middleweight title, currently held by Israel Adesanya. He will be defending that belt against Paulo Costa. This will take place at UFC 253 on September 26th. However, no location was announced, and Dana was actually very close to the vest about the plans and that, saying that there were options open. I think it's safe to say Apex Center or Fight Island would be the two obvious choices there. Pat, any thoughts on location wise where you think we might be headed for this one?
I think we're probably headed to Abu Dhabi. I know Dana's talked about doing a 5 or 6 week stint back at Fight Island. And again, under the agreement that the UFC has with the Abu Dhabi Tourism Board in terms of I'm not sure what changes are going on to that agreement, because obviously something's happening there in order to get this done. But I still imagine, last time what was written in, I believe it was Sports Business Daily, in an interview with, I forget his name, the lawyer for the UFC that got the deal done for Fight Island. The UFC was getting paid to go out there, essentially. Everything was paid for, was getting a premium on top of it, really was able to cut costs to almost nothing to be out there. My guess is they're trying to negotiate doing that again, and there's something holding that up, whether it's giving Abu Dhabi some money this time or renegotiating their 5-year deal, something of that nature. But I would imagine you end up there, and if that falls through negotiations, you're going to Apex. That's what I'd guess.
Yeah, I think that's about right too. We also saw Alexander Volkanovski defend his belt against Max Holloway. I believe that too was at Fight Island. They're coming from the same camp, and that was a place that sort of was reserved for international fights. So it will make sense that will be the destination. So now let's talk about this fight itself. To some extent there. I know as the event gets closer, I'm sure we'll dive deeper into this as far as some of the X and O's are concerned, and even the storylines surrounding both champion and challenger. But Dana White, very, very excited about this one. He is predicting this will be the fight of the year. I do remember earlier in the year, he made a similar prediction about Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero. But anyway, a whole other story there. We'll leave that alone. Are you agreeing with that? You think Dana's right on this one, that this is a potential fight of the year candidate?
So this time I'm leaning more towards Dana, despite the fact we got burned with UL versus Izzy. I mean, that was hard. I still have that picture up on my timeline. My parents were in town and actually were about seeing it. They loved the Lily Zhang versus Joanna fight. And then we got to the main event and they were passed out within 6 minutes. Pictures out there, just them just falling asleep on each other because it was a snooze fest. That all being said, yeah, I think this one will be different. I think it will be fight of the year, or it's going to end early. I think that's another possibility. Hard to say it's fight of the year if it goes one round, which I think this could, simply because Costa is not going to play the counter game that Romero did. I think Romero did a great job exposing something that Izzy needs to work on in terms of, he tried to force Izzy to come to him, and Izzy didn't know what to do there. Izzy tried to, I think that really messed Izzy up in terms of his game plan, and that's why it was as close and as boring as it was. Costa, though, is known to go in there and just slug it out. He's got a chin on him. I think that's a huge point. I think this is going to be a barn burner for as long as it lasts, but I also, again, think it could end in round one. So I'd say right now I would go 70. I'm feeling 70% that Dana is right, that this is going to last a while. Adesanya's got a chin on him as well. I think it could last quite a bit, but we'll see. It's going to be a fun one. I think, I hope, or it's, or we're just jinxing ourselves and, it's going to be another snooze fest. So
I'm really not anticipating a great fight here. I think it will be a great exhibition for Israel. I think it'll be a great showcase for his skill set. But will this be a great fight as far as anything remotely like what we saw when he fought Kelvin Gastelum for the interim title? Absolutely not. I think this is going to look a lot more like him winning the undisputed belt against Robert Whittaker. I think we're going to see Costa charge in like a madman and get clipped 7 ways to hell for every step he takes. That's sort of what I'm anticipating here. So I just want to very briefly here. I'm going to pull up Paulo Costa's resume to confirm that I'm not losing my mind here and forgetting some things that should be very obvious. So as I thought, his most notable win is Uriah Hall. Yoel Romero.
Yeah.
Yoel, in a very closely disputed fight. A lot of people saw that for Romero. I actually saw that for Costa from my vantage point in the arena. I thought Costa won that fight, but it was very close. But it was also a fight comprised of two madmen built like comic book characters who just played out the third act of every DCEU movie. They ran into each other head first, and they just didn't stop swinging until the ref had to separate them. That was essentially the full 15 minutes of that fight. Israel Adesanya is not that sort of fighter. He is not that guy. And now when I think back to the win that first got him, I think, noticed in most people's eyes was against Johnny Hendricks.
Yes.
A understandably washed and just depleted version of Johnny Hendricks that had no business at middleweight, much less fighting perhaps the biggest middleweight on the roster.
Yeah.
Followed by his win against Uriah Hall. Impressive win, except for the fact, in my opinion, Uriah Hall was winning that fight until he decided to brawl, until he decided to abandon his technique, until he decided to abandon all aspects of fight IQ. He was winning that fight. The question we need to ask ourselves here is Israel Adesanya going to abandon his fight IQ? Is he suddenly going to forget that he is a championship level world-class kickboxer and go in there, stick his chin out, and just swing for the fences? I don't think he does that. If he didn't do it against a guy like Romero, who is very similar to Paulo Costa as far as their level of aggression and some of the dangers they pose from an athletic standpoint, I don't think he does it here. I think what happens is Paulo Costa is going to do his part in pushing the agenda, but it's only going to highlight someone who is proven to be a very, very dangerous counter striker. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, all right, I will, because I think it's going to go a little different. No, I think you're right. I think, at least in the sense, I think you're right in the sense that Adesanya is not going to abandon his fight IQ. I think he's going to, come in at those angles. I think he's going to do his counter striking, which is, on another level. I think that's going to all be there. But I think the big thing that was also highlighted in that Yoel Romero fight is if you get to the point where you stand in the pocket for Adesanya and he clips you and you don't go away, that becomes somewhat of an issue for Adesanya where he gets stuck in those fights. And you could see it in the Kelvin Gastelum fight, right? I think the most notable part of that, great back and forth was that Gastelum just ate those shots and kept coming at him. And he got aggressive and he had angles as well, but where Gastelum did the most damage was in the pocket. That's when he rocked Adesanya. That's I think the big issue that Izzy might have is he might execute his game flawlessly in terms of counter striking, in terms of landing right on the chin, and Costa might just keep running forward. And if he comes forward in a way that forces Adesanya into some quick brawls just back and forth, right? You saw that in the Romero fight occasionally where, like, in order to dodge Romero, he had to get in, throw a couple, and then get out. I think that's where Adesanya might have some trouble. I think Costa's chin is ridiculous. If it holds up, because like you said, I thought Uriah Hall was probably winning that fight until Costa got him. But a big part of that is Costa just walks through you. He gets into brawls. Yoel especially was a big, as you said, kind of two madmen just going at each other. But he also is calculated in a lot of what he does as well. He doesn't just rush in throwing like Whitaker did, where he's just kind of, doing big right, hook hoops or trying to jump at him. That's not going to be Costa. He's going to walk kind of slowly straight at you, eating shots while looking for straights down the pocket, in my opinion. I'm no analyst, so maybe I'm, we'll see we'll see what everyone else thinks. But I think that if he's able to absorb the strikes that Adesanya throws that normally hurts people and puts them down, and he's able to walk through them, I think that's where this becomes a firefight. I think it becomes much more like the Gastelum fight, even though I believe Gastelum's probably a better boxer overall than Costa. I think Costa has that wild card factor of just running through things, just walking through shots. And if he does that, it's going to be a new kind of, I don't know, new challenge for Adesanya. I don't know how Adesanya is going to handle that. But then again, he might just stick and move an angle and just piece him up. And it might be, even if Costa survives, it might be, 25 minutes of him eating Adesanya's shots from a million angles. That could happen too. But to me, I think it's going to be much more, especially with the bad blood coming in between this fight, I think it's going to be much more of a firefight for as long as it lasts.
I'm glad you mentioned some of that there, because you definitely bring up some good points, particularly about the Kelvin Gastelum fight. And that was, one of the more impressive, I like to call it technical brawls, I think, in MMA history, the way those two went at it. And I think it's important to note technical brawl. You're dealing with, I think in Adesanya was dealing with a guy who, as you acknowledged before, a far superior boxer to Paulo Costa, just from the standpoint of who throws a fundamental jab, who gets their head off the center line, who throws the right hand at the right time. So you're dealing with someone who's more skilled in the stand-up, but also is a very, very skilled wrestler, and someone who's able to threaten with that wrestling at any given moment. Now, while Costa has a lot of power, obviously he's a very strong man, not necessarily the technician when it comes to striking or grappling. So I think you're going to take a lot of those elements of danger away from Adesanya, to where someone with his skill level is probably going to be looking at him almost like a punching bag. It's just, all right, don't get hit, and I can do what I want. That's sort of the vibe I get. To a lesser extent, I'm thinking Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin level of defense and countering is what we're going to witness.
It could be. And again, I guess even in that extent, though, like remember, everybody knows the Forrest Griffin, Anderson Silva gif of Forrest just throwing and Silva dodging it and then just laying Griffin down. Silva just comes back, lays Griffin down. But imagine if he punches Griffin and Griffin just stays there and keeps throwing. That's what I'm expecting to happen. And I think a huge factor that not enough people are talking about, and what may be a sticking point in terms of where the fight is being held and all of that, is the cage size. I think this is going to be a huge, for once, I mean, it does make a difference. I will say the smaller cage versus the large cage makes a difference in every fight. But I think in this fight in particular, if you have a smaller cage and Adesanya can't get the angles he wants because he's getting backed up against the cage more, that really hurts him in this. Because I think that's where, like you said, I mean, yes, Costa's not as technical. Yes, he doesn't have the wrestling threat. But if Adesanya gets backed into a corner, gets backed up against the cage and literally can't go anywhere without Costa throwing big bombs at him, and he's just walking through shots, that's something Adesanya's got to be ready for. So it very well could be, again, like a punching bag that just has to dodge. But to me, I think it's going to end up being much more of a firefight, if anything, just because Costa is going to not be phased. Even in the Gastelum fight, Gastelum got hurt, got rocked, would eat shots and would respect Adesanya's power. If Costa doesn't do that and doesn't go down, that's going to be a whole new situation for Izzy, where he's throwing some of his best counter shots and the dude just keeps walking forward. It becomes reminiscent of first time McGregor fought Diaz, right? That to me was at the end of that fight in the locker room, McGregor says, I threw everything at him. He just kept walking through him. And then, it was first round was all McGregor. Second round, Diaz learned from it. And and that's all it takes. Costa has that power, and we know Izzy can get hurt because Gastelum hurt him. He has that power that as long as he's still in the fight, one shot will end it. So we'll see. I think it's going to be a fun brawl, but you may be right. Maybe I'm too hopeful again. Maybe I need a little cynicism. Maybe that's my problem.
I'm so just over the top cynical, so over the top pessimistic. Maybe I'm the one with the problem here. But I'm also thinking about, you brought up something about the bad blood between the two, which I think is definitely a notable aspect to this fight. But the last time we saw Adesanya with genuine bad blood for somebody probably was a Derek Brunson fight, We saw how that went. And Brunson, obviously for his flaws that he showed in that fight, I mean, a superiorly skilled fighter in every way, shape, and form to Paulo Costa. Athletically is probably the only place where you put Costa above Brunson, in my opinion, in that respect. So, the bad blood didn't affect him there, and their bad blood was very serious. There was, a post fight, no, excuse me, not a post fight, a pre-fight press conference for UFC 227 in Los Angeles. I was live covering that one, only to find that several hours or so before or after this press conference, there was some sort of confrontation at a bar between Adesanya and Brunson that made its way to social media. So that was real. That was real. It went beyond just your normal round of trash talk and Twitter insults, which, by the way, they are really checking all the boxes, good and bad, for their Twitter feud right now. But yeah, that didn't have an effect on Adesanya, at least a negative effect on his performance when they finally met each other at, I believe it was UFC 234, maybe.
No, that was Silva. It was another.
Oh, that was the Silva fight. Okay, yeah. So that was 230 is what it was in Madison Square Garden. Yeah. So didn't have a negative effect on him then. I don't think it's going to have a negative effect on him this time. And I think the style matchup is going to make it easier for him to show what he does best. So I hope I'm right, simply to stroke my ego.
Well, I mean, my counter argument there would be Brunson only lasted half a round in that one, and it was of a 3-round fight before he got knocked out. So I wonder what Izzy would have done if Brunson would have just eaten those shots and kept coming. My guess is still would have pieced him up, because I personally think Brunson just didn't have the wrestling. His shots were kind of, I don't know what he was doing with some of those angles trying to get in there. But yeah, it very well could be that way. I hope you're wrong, because I want to see a great fight and a fight of the year. So I hope that your ego takes a massive hit and that Costa just, makes it a barn burner. And I don't really care who wins, but I hope it's clearly the fight of the decade, and you look like a fool for everything you've just said.
So are you trying to say that the good of the sport and the fans and the fighters and everything, that's more important than my ego? You're really trying to put that above my ego? Is that really what you're saying?
I mean, I wouldn't word it like that. I would just say it's more about my ego. So I'm putting my ego above your ego, because that would make me feel good if I was right about my fight of the year contender prediction. And then, I don't really, fans, whatever. Well, sport,
you know what?
Whatever.
That's a motivation I can get behind, sir. Touche.